Several centuries ago, humanity was discovered, or it discovered us. At the time, many of the places around the entire universe were at war. Many species were fighting each other for territory and resources. The humans themselves, though, had spread out across several different planetoids, satellites, and had made their own way in the universe and had been relatively unseen. Reports had come in and let everyone know what a human was and where they were, but it was a very remote and uninteresting part of the galaxy. So they were left to their own devices. When it came time that a few species tried to push into their territory, the humans simply stated that they wanted to be left alone. If we left them alone, they would leave us alone. They would not choose a side. At this point, many species decided to ask, who are they to actually question our abilities? Who are they to put any type of restraints on us? Who were they to say we had to listen to them? They simply asked, exactly how many billions of humanity do you wish to face? With that, many decided to back away. Humanity itself said that they would cull themselves if necessary, but they would leave the entire rest of the galaxy alone as they did not want to get dragged into anybody else's conflict. They already realized that if they were, they would be used as cannon fodder, as many of our politicians tried desperately to call the humans to their aid. But humanity simply sat back and watched. And for several centuries, they stayed that way, alone, isolated, away from everyone else. Eventually, the entire galaxy got tired of war, and they decided to put their weapons down for now, and decided to look into exploration and scientific discovery. The wars had taken away so much in the way of history, so much in the way of discovery, so much in the way of science, as many species were found after they were wiped out to have advanced technologies that could have aided everybody. And yet now these technologies sit idle. They are unknown how to be activated, how to be used. The analysis on the components allows everyone to remanufacture it, but being able to control it, that's a whole nother one altogether. Because of this, many started to look over to humanity to see if they were willing to join the galaxy at large now that all the wars have stopped. The humans simply replied, no. A simple phrase. Every single time an offer was made to humanity, they always received no. Many sensors and probes were sent into humanity's sectors. Many of them only got a short way into the sectors, maybe a few orbits in at the closest planetoid, and then were immediately destroyed. No one wanted to face off against a species they didn't know anything about, so it was decided that humans would be taken. Humans would be studied. Humans would be the next target. So a simple expedition was sent out. A colony was chosen, one that didn't have many, only about 3.5 million inhabitants. 3.5 million over an entire planet, roughly a third the size of their own home planet, as a way of subduing the population without having to notably send our ships and our soldiers into the fight, which may anger the humans, and the last thing we need is to kick a Neuraxian bee's nest. No, we needed something that would frighten them so much that they would beg us for help. But first, we set up distortion fields around so that their communications could not go in or out. We knew this would only be a matter of time before those sending messages in would get curious and send their own ships, so we had to make this quick. After setting up the distortion fields, we sent the pods down, along with several shuttles, holding the most dangerous creatures of any human media has ever produced. These included massive amphibians, giant canines, strange animals that glowed, others that flew and spit fire, some that were bipedal and somewhat intelligent that looked similar to what the humans call dogs, and of course, a type of humanoid that simply had very large canines and insisted on subsisting on blood, of all things. We didn't understand why these scared the humans, nor did we care. We just needed them correctly frightened for us to take over. Enough for them to cry for help, to beg for mercy from us. And then we would simply send our shuttles down as a mercy mission and say that we were going to evacuate them. And then we could simply take them into our space. With that, the messages would be left behind that we were simply evacuating them from a horrible situation. And there you go. We're the good guys in the situation. And no one can argue with that. No one would ever think possibly that we were taking them for experimentation. The colony, Xeno-Ek 3, was not much. Nearly a barren rock with very little in the way of resources. Though they were doing something we found called terraforming. It would take a long time for this to actually occur. So it was not difficult to get our own creatures down there. They would not be able to see our ships, our shuttles, our pods as they came through the atmosphere, as our distortion fields made it impossible for their radars to pick anything up. And then they would be released. With that, the shuttles would take off, the ships would disappear, and the pods would simply melt down using a nanite explosion. With that, our tracks were covered. The only tracks remaining are from those what the humans call cryptids, as they bolted across everything. Some of them made absolutely no sense, like this extremely tall thing that had some sort of loud, alert system as a mouth. It was odd. It moved strange. It didn't move nearly as fast as it did in their literature. We thought we had done something wrong, but it didn't matter. As soon as it got out of the ship, it ran over to any foliage and simply stood there, silent and still, and then blew the horn. Extremely loud. So loud that it actually began to crack some of the glass that was around the area. Our ship's crew immediately pulled away, believing this creature would do something even more nefarious. But then they just sat back and watched. Many probes who were just barely able to see through the distortion field were able to look through and watch as these creatures, these cryptids, made their way across. With that, we were surprised. The humans, though initially frightened and ran from them, did not run far. In fact, they came out and they began to fire their ballistic weapons along with their new energy weapons. They pulled out a strange energy blade that they began to slice apart the cryptids with. And then we saw something we didn't think we would see. The humans laughed. They were laughing in joy as they began to tear apart these creatures. We sent even more down, thinking possibly we could overrun them with sheer force. We even sent down 20 different shuttles, dropping in the same location full of something called the humans. They call it a zimbi? Boy, human words are strange. Regardless of that, they went up in a strange horde, moving slowly. Apparently this was supposed to invoke fear. The humans simply formed a line with their own ballistic weapons and began to knock them down one at a time, seemingly taking wagers on how many each of them could take down with a shot. It was just amazing and strange. We looked over in their strange encounter suits, and the humans, we couldn't see them through their suits, but we knew they were there. No other species moves that way. Humans, like many others, 2 arms and 2 legs, but they're very tall for their size. Most of the other races are only about 2/3 of the human's height, if at all that. Many times they only reach about halfway up the human stature. So we needed something else. We sent a few more down there, and these seemed to be more and more devastating. In one case, we even sent a giant reptilian creature down, strong enough to take down entire buildings with a single sway of its tail. The humans simply brought out larger weapons. How is this possible? But eventually, the second large lizard was starting to make headway. Many of the humans began to evacuate and run, and we realized we'd simply run the humans out of ammunition. And then we laughed and started taking wagers on how they would survive. Eventually, they ran into the few forested areas there was. The large lizard had taken too much damage trying to run through. hitting on strange different materials that either shocked it or exploded underfoot, and eventually blowing one of the legs clean off. It would take a long time, a very long time, to create another one and to make sure that its mental capacities were enough to do what we wanted it to. So we had to wait. The humans banded together inside their forested areas, and they began to fight back using primitive weapons. Stones, spears, arrows. They began to construct their buildings. Why were they not surrendering? We knew they had transmitters, as they were constantly calling out to see if there were any humans in the area. We responded a few times, saying that we were close by and could assist, but they never ever responded. With that, we dropped the last load of their cryptides down. These ones were mostly canines. Very large, broad animals that scared us even, as those yellow eyes seemed to pierce through our souls. They began to charge through, and in many cases made it all the way through the humans' population. They began to rip things apart and chew on the humans, seeming to have a certain predilection for the youngest of humans, as they seemed to be more tender and tasty. But this seemed to enrage the humans even more, as they fought back with even greater strength. It was insane. They were out of ships and guns. They would use knives and sticks in their bare hands, if need be, to take down these creatures. As we realized, one of the distress calls had actually got through the distortion field to the closest of their settlements. We worried. We worried that this would bring the wrath of all the humans, so we hurried to set up distortion fields around the next colony, and we made it in time before they began to set out messages, and we worried that this would be more of an issue. Those of the colony next door asked the humans there what they faced, and when video came up, they again laughed and then said, "We'll be right there." A simple message. We wanted to stop them as best we could, but we worried that we wouldn't be able to, and unfortunately we were right. The humans that had shown up there began to drop down right next to the settlements with their shuttles. Without hesitation, we burst into the scene and fired as many weapons we could into the two ships that had showed up. The shuttles that were on the ground immediately stayed grounded. They didn't know what hit them as we jumped in from FTL, fired all our weapons, and immediately jumped out before any sensors could possibly find us. The human vessels were torn up and would eventually stumble their way through the outer atmosphere. Emergency pods began to fire from either side. We knew we had taken them out, so now, again, all we had to do was wait. Wait as now the breeding cryptids were reaching across the entirety of the planet. And as the new humans came out, they came out in even stranger suits. But then they started to take off the suits. How could they do this? Could they survive in this atmosphere? With that, many of the other humans ran inside or received some sort of strange injections that they began to launch into their extremities. What is with these humans? What are they doing? And then they began to take off the last of their encounter suits. And then we saw something we didn't expect. These did not look like the humans of past. No, these humans did not look human. They began to charge into the cryptids that were attacking them every night, and they began to tear them apart with their own claws, their own fangs, their own tails as they whipped through them. They began to tear them limb from limb, whipping around with, if they had any wings, they would take to the skies, swoop down on them, and drive their talons into their backs. Those that were human-shaped with all sorts of canines would rush towards the humans, trying like desperately to bite them, and they would find the humans would simply shove their claws right through the heart of these humanoid creatures we made, and simply pull them out, and then spit on them as they fell down. And then we saw something that made them unmistakably human. They laughed. Even in our sensors, as distorted as they were, we could hear that horrible human laugh. We knew we were in trouble if they knew it was us. They realized that they could take this planet back, and they began to fan out. Within a single rotation around the local star, they had taken the planet back, and every one of those creatures that we sent was dead. And on the planet, they all celebrated in their own forms. These were all different. They looked not like any type of cryptid. No, this wasn't natural. They looked like demons. Demons from their own mythology. Did they find a way to actually summon these from beyond to actually fight? How was this even possible? And as our group got close, realizing that we would actually have to take them by force, before we even realized what was going on, ships bounced in from FTL, some of them jumping in, some of them coming right out of faster than light speed, right over top of us, and immediately telling us to stand down. If we even tried to move or tried to spin up, we were immediately hit with harpoon-type weapons that locked onto our ships and immediately shocked the engines with some sort of pulse. This was enough to knock the engines offline and in tandem taking down the weapon systems. Our entire fleet lost 0 personnel. However, not a single one would return as long as the humans had a say in it. They had captured every one of our ships in a matter of 41 seconds. Everyone in the ships tried desperately to get themselves ready to fight, grabbing any weapons they could. The problem is, the energy weapons were also affected by that strange shock that came through the ship. It was just, how could they do this? Every single type of energy, with the exception of the emergency power, was completely dead. It would take days, our own local days, which would take about 71 hours to get our engines online again, but we didn't have more than a few minutes. Those inside the ships could hear the humans docking with them. They were very careful. They only went to the docking bays as though not to ruin the ships themselves, even though they had punched them full of holes with some sort of strange lance attached to a wire. Primitive, but effective. And as the door opened, many of the crew held different devices, certain chairs, certain tools, just waiting for the humans to walk in. The first human to walk in had to bend down and was looming over the entire crew as a form that looked like it was covered in rock walked in. It looked around at each of them, each of the crew members shaking in fear as this massive bipedal creature had simply walked into their bay. So, who's in charge? Was all it said as it looked to the crew. It raised its giant bulbous hand and pointed with all its digits. Is it you? The crew member that it pointed to simply lost control of its biological functions and passed out. With that, the sound again, the distinctly human laugh came through as several other different beings, not nearly as big, some of them trying to fold wings down behind them, other ones seeming reptilian, others seeming extremely short, our size actually, were walking through, all of them speaking in a human tone. Our translator was having difficulty keeping up with it, yet it still worked. They could understand what was going on. Eventually, they worked their way to the bridge where the captain was standing, defiant, believing that he was dead. The huge rock creature had a lot of trouble getting through the bulkheads, yet made it to the bridge where the ceiling was a little bit higher, which allowed it to stand up a little bit more. It groaned as though being bent over was actually painful. So you're the captain of this fleet? Yes, sir, the commander said, though barely holding it together. Maybe it's time for you to go home. Yes, sir. I do have a couple quick questions, sir, and then we will leave without question. We will leave. We will leave. We'll go. But please, can you answer me one question? You've got one question. You better make it a good one. How do you not? I mean, you're human. Yes, I mean, you don't look human. How can you... Humans look like this. He touched a couple buttons on his console, and an image of a human female popped up. This is what humans look like. Did you take them over, or what? I don't understand. The rock seemed to suddenly have a compassionate look in its eyes. Ah, this, he said as he put his bulbous hand to his equally bulbous chest as he tapped on it. This here. Oh, we humans are big into genetic engineering. Ever since the technology was actually free to use to the public, genetic engineering has been just a passion of ours. If I wanted to, within 7 of the human days, I could look from this to my old form. But I like this form. It suits me, especially if I'm going to go from ship to ship combat. Our humans can willingly change their body. This is amazing. This is amazing. This is absolutely incredible technology. Why don't you spread this with everyone? Oh, we would. But there's a problem. What is that? You would simply use it to create more of those things. He simply pointed down to the planet through the glass. The captain knew what he was talking about. Genetic engineering had been more of a pastime for the rest of the galaxy instead of a passion like it was with the humans. The captain understood this as he looked over at the female that was there. Her extremely sleek form and wings emphasized everything about her. Everything the commander had actually read about humans' attractiveness was accentuated, and it seemed as though he fully understood. Yes, sir. Thank you for not destroying us. It is appreciated. You can show your appreciation by delivering a message. Yes, sir. Anything, sir. Go away. And stay away.